Welcome to Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere with your host, Chris Parker.
And we're back with Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere. This is Chris Parker, and I have Don Maruska on today. And he's coming in, I believe, from Morro Bay, California in the United States. And Morro Bay is on one of my top places to go, near San Luis Obispo on the coast. I've been fishing off of Morro Bay, and I believe on one of those trips I was actually I caught the largest what I think they call rock cod on one of those fishing trips. And my brother has a beach house not far from there, just up the coast. Absolutely gorgeous. And so I'm also looking at Don's picture in the back, which is probably something to do with where he's from. So I'm really absorbing, I think, my imagination of the atmosphere that he is living in. And Don, we met recently on a global challenge for education. We'll talk about that. But before we get into that, can you please share with us, and I'm really curious what your answer is because you've done so much, what is it that you do and why do you do what you do?
Well, that is a complex question for me because I've had, 3 or 4 different chapters in my career. What I am fundamentally is an entrepreneur. That is, I'm have a special talent and skill at taking the pieces of something, be it in the social sector or in the for-profit business sector, and figuring out how to put them together. I can quickly visualize how something can be an opportunity, how it could be taken to market, how it could happen. And sometimes that frustrates me because I find other people don't necessarily have that immediate image, that immediate concept. And so it's a joy to do it because I love creating things, sort of in my DNA.
And so the why behind the why is the love of creating things. Where did that come from? How did that spark in you?
Well, I've always had a wide range of interests. So I love to look at how analogous situations can inform the challenge that we have before us, whether that be with a community organization, be that with a business. I'm always thinking about, well, where have we seen an example of what this organization is trying to do? It's the sort of thing that I encountered when I was a venture capitalist. I started a boutique venture firm that was very successful in Silicon Valley. And the main thing that the venture investors, not only ourselves, but other venture firms would ask is, well, what's an analogous situation? Who else has made money doing the kind of thing you're proposing to do? And it's a very good discipline to have because it really prompts us to think about, okay, we're not the first one to create a wheel. Let's find out what other wheels have worked and then figure out, how we can use those wheels and put them on a vehicle and get to the destination that we want rather than reinventing things or thinking or having the hubris to think we're the only ones to have ever done anything like this before. So I find that really helps me in thinking through different business opportunities. This is the sort of thing that we were talking about when we did the Future of the Planet Purpose Alliance effort, which is something I really care about deeply. And I was thinking, well, what's the challenge to trying to get people to reduce their carbon footprint? And then I thought, well, what have been other situations where people have tried to reduce something, in their personal life?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you think about people who are trying to lose weight, and what are the different vehicles that have been used for that purpose? And then you think of, okay, well, what are some successful ones of those? And then, okay, that's a big successful one is Weight Watchers. They have something like 4.7 million people enrolled in Weight Watchers. It's like a $1.5 billion business a year. People losing weight.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was the idea. Well, how could we do that to help people reduce their carbon footprint? How could we have carbon watchers? Sort of thing. So that's what I enjoy, that creative process that helps me to think about analogous ways of doing things that can inform a current opportunity. And then, of course, you have to look at, well, how is this situation different than those others, and how to make modifications and everything else. But it gives a starting point, and it gives people an immediate image of something that they can relate to tangibly, that helps them.
I experienced your, I guess, interventions during the Future of the Planet challenge as not only on that discovering sort of an analogous example, which I thought was masterful, of bringing in the Weight Watchers sort of comparison, and that really allowed the team to sort of, come closer and have a bit of a vision, because that's something that they could imagine. But you were also a coalition builder, meaning throughout the experience. What I remember, it was a couple of weeks ago now, is that you were actively looking to see how people's own capabilities and interests could be connected. Was that purposeful? Like, is that part of your success strategy, or is that something that I was just observing out of my own appreciation?
Well, it's something that I do naturally, and it's something that I do intentionally. The thing that I discovered in Silicon Valley, having been founder and CEO of 3 companies there, is that, and my longtime mentor, Eugene Kleiner, or Kleiner Perkins, always said, it really is how the people work together. You can have a great idea, but it's really whether the people have it together to bring it forward. And in fact, the old saw in Silicon Valley is, in terms of making an investment, is you look first at the people, secondly at the market, and then third at the actual product. Usually entrepreneurs turn that upside down and say, oh, look at this wonderful product I have. That, they're all so proud of it, of a newborn baby, and they should be proud of it. But that isn't how investors invest, because they know that it takes people. If you have great people in a growing or changing market, it doesn't have to be growing market, but it has to be changing. It has to be dynamic, so that you can find opportunities. Otherwise, you're just fighting for what the current situation is. But you have great people in a dynamic market, they will find products. And so often I discovered, or services, I discovered that those products and services actually change from the original iteration. Very few successful businesses hit it on the first round, of what their product concept is, or what their service formulation might be. You hear about them, so you think that that's what happened. Like, oh, this was a brain, phenomenal event, and somebody envisioned this, and it burst full born into life. But that isn't really how it happens. And so that's why I think the people part of this is so important. And the challenge that I found is in bringing diverse people together, like we had with that challenge opportunity. People came from all over, and some of us hadn't even met, until the actual moment we got together and spent a day sorting through these ideas. Is that people, each person has his or her own way of making decisions, of acting, and so it's worked for them to some degree, which is why they use it. And so they come to a group, especially a group that they haven't worked with, or a diverse group of people. It could be true in a community as well. And then they start butting heads, because they're not doing it the way I would do it. They're not thinking about this. They're not involving people the way I would. So I discovered that it was critically important to figure out how to create a software, if you will, human software, for people to interact effectively. And that was really the subject of my first book, How Great Decisions Get Made, applying the insights of neuroscience and psychology and organizational behavior to figure out how we can bring diverse groups of people together, get focused, and get results in a way that builds not only a good decision, but as I found in Silicon Valley, it's one thing to have a good decision. It's another thing to get a result. Sometimes you can bring a team together. You can, pound out a solution. In fact, some people use those words. We're going to pound out a solution. but then people don't apply it because they weren't involved, they weren't engaged, they didn't feel like it was really part of it, and they sort of say, oh yeah, okay, I nodded my head and went along with it because that was where I thought the boss was going or something strange like that. um, and they don't really get on board to have the implementation, and therefore they're not, and then they have the frustration, well, we didn't accomplish anything with that, and then they actually demotivate themselves and themselves as a team because they can't be successful together. So that's why I give particular attention to that. It's actually something I've had to learn myself. So it came through the kind of crucible of Silicon Valley, dealing with venture investors and some of the businesses I was starting and co-founders and working through all that. It was messy and hard and painful in some respects. And when my wife and I adopted our daughter, that was another decision-making thing. Life was changing. We had a kid, we each were both very active professionally. How were we going to navigate that? So I just found all these places, instead of like the Zen saying that, the situation keeps presenting itself until we learn the lesson. And so I learned the lesson and found some very effective techniques of reaching effective decisions together. And we tried them out first in sort of the acid test, which I call it, of a marriage relationship. It worked there, and I thought, oh, this could work in business too. Then I tried it in business, and I found I was reaching decisions in business that were not only feeling better in terms of the relationships that were involved, but I was actually coming up with decisions that were making more money than I would have discovered otherwise.
I really need to bite on this and ask you the question, how do you make better decisions?
Well, one of the things that's a very helpful insight for that is to think about some of the current neuroscience that we have. And what I've been fascinated by are the positron emission tomography scans. Those are the scans of the brain when you're actually thinking and working, and it looks at, where is the brain working and where isn't it, and that sort of thing. And when people are in a combative situation, in a team, or where they're just fearful of, who's going to look good, who's going to look bad, will my idea prevail, did somebody just shoot me down, all those sorts of things. You get this feeling like, oh my gosh, this isn't going to work out, and then you start to withdraw. You can actually see it in these positron emission tomography scans. When someone's fearful like that, or they're feeling like, I don't know where this is going, and I don't feel comfortable engaging, the prefrontal cortex, the executive function of the brain, you actually see the metabolism drop dramatically. The cerebral lobes are creative parts of the brain that can come up with new solutions, kicks out as well. And what fires off is the amygdala, the lizard brain, as some people call it, and that shoots the adrenaline down, and then we get all fired up. Our systems are working more actively. All of which, served us a great evolutionary purpose. We could go, confronted with a tiger, we could kill the tiger or run away. But the problems and challenges we have in business today are really much more complex. They require more nuanced solutions. They require creative results. And they're not things we need to figure out in a nanosecond. I remember, back in the heyday of the .com boom and bust, people were talking about, how fast they could make a decision. It's almost like a pinball game. They were hitting the pinball and, scoring points by making fast decisions, but they weren't getting results. So when people are in a hopeful frame of mind, however, you see the brain function change dramatically. The parts of the brain that have more metabolic activity are the prefrontal cortex, the cerebral lobes, and the amygdala that was lizard brain firing off before is just at kind of a neutral state. It's neither deactivated nor or highly activated. And that makes a huge difference then. So the whole invitation to us as leaders and as partners and members of a community and so on, is to figure out how can we create for ourselves and for others the conditions that give us that better brain performance. So a lot of what I do is really try to figure out and go into situations where people are trying to come up with a better solution and apply techniques that work effectively. Some of them are very parallel to the purpose alliance kinds of things. So since we've learned from the neuroscience that asking people about what their hopes are about this and why those are important to them and finding some common ground creates the conditions for better brain thinking, that's one of the places where we start. And we also make sure to include everybody who's got a stake in the issue. A lot of people who get left out, then the solution because, well, they didn't invite me. I could, if they had, I could have told them there was this better solution, of course, which never got vetted because they weren't included. So you start off with getting everybody involved. You get them talking about what their hopes are and why those are important to them. You discover what your common ground is to move forward, and then you have an opportunity to listen to people and just have them talk about the topic. Share with me what is coming up for you about this. What are some of the concerns or thoughts that you have, and then you have people reflect back. What we don't do in organizations very well is really listen. We sort of nod our heads a lot, but we don't listen because we're creating like in fact, some people have said, I can't reflect back what that person just said because I'm thinking about what I'm going to say. Well, of course, that's exactly the reason to be reflecting back. So the reflective listening, active listening, as some people call it, is another component that's really critically important because that gives people the possibility of understanding each other, finding where the truth may lie, where the opportunities may exist that are beyond, my own thinking or someone else's own thinking, into, an open space where they can find it, more effectively. And then creating the conditions for vetting those issues that don't have winners and losers. Because when there are winners and losers, what do the losers do? Well, they either leave or they try to gather up their argument for the next round, whatever that may be. We're doing that in our society, with the political environment. It's just insane. We're just cycling bad brain performance over and over and over. So an easy way to do that I found is to have people talk about, well, let's go through each of the options. Let's start with the status quo because that's where we are and we need to understand what that is. I have people talk about, what do you see as the negatives of that? And every person is invited to offer a negative, even if they think the status quo is great. With intellectual honesty, they can acknowledge that there's something that's a shortcoming. If nothing else, that maybe it hasn't garnered the support of others. So there's something missing here. Then it's quite transparent if somebody's just gaming this and just trying to only put forward their own idea and advocate it by saying, these are all the great things about my idea and these are all the bad things about all the others. Because if they don't come up with something that's a negative, it's very transparent to the rest of the group that they're just playing a game. So people modify their behavior because they realize that's not going to work. Then you go around and you talk about, well, what are the positives? And even if somebody thinks the status quo is terrible, they can see some positive. So it opens up the space. You don't have winners and losers. You don't have advocates. We have this very strange idea in our culture that debate creates light and enlightenment. And it really, from the neuroscience now, it doesn't. It creates just bad brain performance.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I have some dear friends who are passionate debaters, and I keep thinking to myself, through this type of what I oftentimes feel is sort of aggressive interaction, have people actually influenced their others' thinking? I think typically not, as opposed to what I would consider more reflective, positive inquiry. And what's coming to my mind is the term that's floating around a lot around psychological safety in teams. And it sounds to me like you have a lot of experience in tactics for leaders to actually create the psychological safety in order for people to have that comfort, in order to maybe voice the unpopular, and also for people to be, also voice the vulnerable, so people know where they're coming from and what the deeper concerns are, which in my experience is always, it creates a much richer engagement, and ultimately better decisions. So, Don, question. How do you now help people with this? Because you go to donmaruska.com, and that is Don, and then Maruska is MARUSKA.com. And in there you can download some ebooks, and there's some speaking engagements. How are you helping people improve their performance in general leadership, I think, out in the market these days?
Yeah. Well, there's several ways. One is I'm frequently called upon to help solve really tough issues. So I've done that with Fortune 100 companies where they've been at loggerheads on a major issue. One of the major software companies, they hired the best and the brightest from all over the world, and they got all those egos together, and they couldn't even decide on the color of the couch in their lounge area. They fought over that because, once people have difficulty deciding something together, whatever that topic is, it's just like in a marriage. Every other topic that they touch becomes difficult because they haven't worked out those issues. So sometimes I'm invited in to help people solve those issues, which we can typically do in a very short targeted time if we're getting their best brain performance versus their default or negative brain performance. So that's one way. The other way is I'm very interested in how to help people go forward with their careers and develop their talents, and to do that effectively, because I think we have a lot of talent that's sitting on the sideline. Even from people who are working hard. They're working hard, but I ask them, are you making the highest and best use of their talent? And I find people on a scale of 0 to 100, typically the answer is, something around 60% of what they think that they're capable of. It's not that they want to work harder, but it's just that they're not being used in the most effective way. So figuring out how to help people both individually and organizationally make the best use of their talent is critically important. And it starts off in the same sort of way, having what we call a talent catalyst conversation, how to catalyze fresh thinking about the use of our talent. With that question of, well, what are the hopes that you have for your career? Why are those important to you? Very few organizations ever ask employees that because they are fearful of, well, what if I ask my employee that and the employee comes back and decides, they want to do something totally different than what they're doing here. Where will we be? And so CEOs have literally told me, I'm fearful of that question. But the amazing thing is that people want to do their best work, and they want to do the best work where they are. They'll move if that can't work out, but just giving them an opportunity to voice what their hopes are and why they're important to them and what they would like to explore about ways to apply it just frees up a tremendous amount of energy. You actually see I do pre and post analyses of this, and that score of average of about 60 goes up about 20 points or more, up to 80 or higher, even in the short span of like 3 months, because people feel this rush of energy and good brain performance that comes from being able to engage what is truly their passion and figure out how to do that in their business versus like, okay, I'm showing up here, but after 5 o'clock, I'm on my own. I'm going to go do what I really like to do. I mean, how many people are out there in the world with that kind of attitude? And what are we losing as a result of it? So those are the kinds of things that I get excited about.
Well, I think isn't it almost any CEO's dream to have their team personally vested in the outcome and working on things that they're truly passionate about. I would tend to agree that some might be fearful of that because they have sort of forced through ego and willpower people into a structure based on the belief of what's best for the company. But yeah, it was really early in my career working with the gentleman Tom Carey, and his tip was, if you can get good talented people and connect them to work on topics they are genuinely interested in, most of your job as a manager is done. And then you just need to monitor to see if you've screwed up and assigned them to the wrong thing, or if they actually need some real help. And then And then I think, as I've wrestled with that over the years, I think for me, the definition of leadership in that context is to knowing when to let them swim and when to actually help them, or when I've made a decision that was incorrect and assigned someone to maybe something that was inappropriate and unfair. And that is that wrestle of what to do as a leader.
Well, those are great points, Chris. And I think, there are illustrations as well. If those decisions made about what people do and how they do it and all that are made in an open kind of forum, then you don't have that resistance to like, oh, the boss is making me do it this way, but I know I could do it so much better another way. Well, it may be that the boss actually has a better way of doing it and has thought through the things that the employee might have thought would have been superior from their vantage point, but that never got aired. There's never a chance to hear that. And so by giving that opportunity, there's much more engagement that happens. There's a lot written about engagement and about, the psychological safety, all these different sorts of things. And the notion is, well, how, but it always is very kind of like leadership centric. What can a leader do to motivate the troops? What can the leader do to create psychological safety? As if it was a very paternalistic situation. And really, like you're describing, the key thing is freeing up those people and resources, letting them bring their ideas forward. And then it bubbles up rather than, trying to push it down.
I've got a challenging question, maybe, or maybe it's quite easy. What I'm curious is, this is a fundamental, I'll call it leadership style, but you accurately call that maybe a bit paternalistic. But this is a fundamental organizational style. So what I'm curious is, if you're moving from a top-down command and control organization style to something that we might call servant leadership, as a term from the 60s, that the other style. Have you seen command and control style leaders and organizations make fundamental shifts without changing the CEO?
Yes, I have. I guess, the data would suggest that a lot of leaders don't make that transition, either because they don't believe in it, it isn't them, they've won and they've advanced to where they are, with the skill set that they have, and they don't wish to change. They just would rather jump to a different organization that needs that hero to come in on the, and clean up Dodge, and they're going to go do it. So they bounce around a lot. And that's why CEO tenure is getting shorter and shorter, because, the generations that are coming forward don't buy that anymore. That doesn't work. Maybe the board likes it and the shareholders like it because they have this sense of, oh, now there's somebody who's in charge and we're really going to take this business forward and all that sort of stuff, the heroic leader concept. But that isn't the way that up and coming, generations want to function. They're looking for, hey, where's the meaning in this for me? How can I express my talents here? How do I have some work-life balance? A lot of different things that are not in the mindset of these CEOs that have distinguished themselves by how they've elbowed their way up. So but I have seen some that do make a change, and usually it's because of something happens. There's some sort of break. They really have lost confidence of their troops, and they're open to thinking about how to, approach it new and differently. Or the business has taken a major hit from external factors and they have to regroup and approach things in a different way. Or the board has intervened or changed and said, look at, you're doing these things great, but these others in your leadership style are just not working. So there are opportunities for that to transform. It takes commitment. It takes effort. It takes a willingness to be awkward. Learning a new skill is going to be awkward. And I talk with the leaders that I coach and tell them, if you're going to change your behaviors, you got to tell people that you're intending to change your behavior, why you are, so they understand what's happening. So they don't think, well, what's my boss trying to do? Is he just sucker punch me, kind of draw me in, being nice after he's been hard nosed, and then I'm going to get the kaboom, or what's going on? So there's a lot of communication that needs to happen if for us to change and grow. But it is possible. It happened in my case for myself.
Ooh, can you tell me about that? So you were a command and control, and then you had some, it sounds like some life confrontation that forced you to adapt. Can you share that story?
Sure. Well, being the first in my family ever to even go to college, I always sort of felt like I had to prove myself, and then, coming out of college and going on and earning my MBA and law degree at Stanford and all, and then coming out and wanting to build and grow companies. I always felt I had to prove, why me? Why am I CEO? And if I'm CEO, then I should have the better ideas. I should have the better abilities and everything else. And of course, that's a real Faustian pact, to say that I can, to have that hubris. But it was a sort of thing like, okay, I've got this opportunity. Now I have to demonstrate all the time that I'm worthy of having it. Not the best place to be, because of course, which brain am I going to be activating, when I'm in that place? I'm going to be activating the brain that's kind of fearful, trying to hold on, versus the one that's kind of like open and say, hey, let me fly with this. So I found, that was a situation where, I wasn't successful in one of my CEO roles. I was able to start it because it could happen with my own conception. I carried it through to, success at its initial levels. But in terms of the ongoing leadership of the organization, that wasn't working for me because I hadn't worked out the additional stage of development and evolution. And so, I think there's nothing prompts leadership change more than being shot out of the saddle. And so, trying to hit the ground and then dusting oneself off and figuring out, okay, time to take a different tack.
Well, there had to have been and obviously there is, just by the nature of who you are and as I experience you, but a sense of awareness, self-awareness of, okay, I just shot out of the saddle, and that's a problem for me. And so, what can I do instead of kick the horse? What can I do to stay in the saddle? And
Right.
And I would say, not everyone that, and you said you went to college, which is, I think, one way that you described, I see on your LinkedIn that it was Harvard and it was magna cum laude. So it was college, but it was a particular college, and then Stanford and Stanford Law. So to have achieved those peaks of education and then career, and then realize that, hey, I just got my ass handed to me. I need to learn and grow. I think is actually remarkable. I hope more people are aware of that. Do you feel in your experience, because you're working with people really all over the world and certainly all over the US, that in general executives have that hunger for growth and self-awareness, or is it maybe a bit of a rarity?
Well, it's hard to generalize, but there are certainly pockets that have a greater sense of awareness. There's a lot of attention being given to what's called conscious leadership. In fact, there's a conscious leadership guild that I'm part of, which are people that are trying to be conscious about how they are approaching their leadership and the leadership challenges, and what to and how to do that effectively. So oftentimes, it's very helpful to have a peer group, to talk these things through, to examine how they could be done differently, bounce ideas off. That's also the role that a coach plays. I became a master certified coach because I wanted to have the skills and abilities to help coach people through these kinds of challenges. And because oftentimes, the CEO, there's no one there for the CEO in particular. The board and the shareholders are there for themselves or for the shareholders' interests. The employees are there, with their interests, but, who's there for the CEO? And after a while, a spouse or a partner or whomever, gets tired of hearing about it. And so it can be a lonely sort of place. And that's where I think good coaching can really help people see things about themselves, reflect. To the person what's happening, even the power of being a good sounding board is very, very useful. Not very many people, people are usually trying to influence the CEO one direction or another. They're really not, or are resisting. They're really not, very few are trying to truly understand, what the person's dealing with. And oftentimes the CEO isn't letting his or her hair down about what's really going on because they want to protect. It's like, a parent that wants to protect the kids. Well, the employees aren't kids, they're adults. So we don't have to protect them from, things that might frighten them about the future of the organization. They probably imagine those are worse all on their own,
Well, it's funny, the protect, and when I give advice, you mentioned helping people with their careers. When I have the privilege of giving people advice on new roles or when they're struggling in an organization, sometimes I try to reframe their relationship with their chain of command up, and particularly if they're reporting to the CEO, so they're sort of that management team or N-1. I asked them, it's like, well, what do you see as your role related to that executive? And then oftentimes they don't have a real answer. And I said, what's always worked for me is I need to protect that person. So it's my job as a subordinate to protect that person. Sometimes I have to protect them against their own stupidity or lack of awareness. Yes. But I also need to protect them by making sure that I never surprise them unnecessarily. And that I make sure that the best I can, that they don't get flanked, or that, if I'm hearing pulse from the market, that, so one of my minds is, yes, I got to get my job done. I have to deliver, what I've promised, objectives or goals or OKRs or whatever it is. But there's also this thing that I take a personal, mission to help that, protect that person. Of course, that person might torpedo themselves, as people often do. And I do believe there's a relationship that you build that after a period of time when you've demonstrated that you have been there for someone and you've had someone's back, that you have this mutual, again, protection comes. Mm-hmm. But it's more of a human relationship of protection as opposed to a guard my territory type protection. Right.
Well, I think that's a very important point that you're raising, Chris, and that's a wonderful thing that you're doing for those people and helping them to develop that kind of awareness. One of the things I've learned is it's very hard to change people's minds. One of the phrases I use is the only person who wants to be changed in their thought or idea, or the only person who wants to be changed at all by somebody else is a wet baby. They want to be changed, but people don't want to be changed. They resist that. But what's interesting is we can give them different behaviors. People will change behaviors much more quickly than they will change, or especially if they're explicitly called upon to change their mindset. So, in the free ebooks that are available at my website on Grow and Enjoy Your Business, there's a tool in it that I found really useful, and it brings up this point of how do you speak to people in power, and present an effective request. And it's an easy way to remember it is it's the inverse of ROI. Everyone knows about ROI, return on investment. We'll just think IOR. And so the I is intention. So in order to get someone's attention to what you want to say, you have to present an intention to them that's a bridge with them. So it would be, CEO, I'd love to support your success as a leader and to have your leadership be as effective as possible with the troops. Okay, so that's a bridge. So okay, now the leader knows where it's coming from, rather than, oh geez, when you just said something to the troops, they thought it was a pile of crap, and they're hating you, the CEO is going to be resistant. Then the O is observation. Just use straightforward, like you're a scientist, just observing. I noticed that when you were talking with the team about X, that I could see that some people were ill at ease and had questions that looked like they might not be committed to that direction. So whatever the observation is, but not judgmental, not saying, hey, you blew the presentation or whatever else. That's going to get that lizard brain going, rather than the better brain. And then the third piece is the request, the simple request. Would you consider when we have our next team meeting, inviting people to bring up the things that might be concerns for them or for some of their team members about an idea before we close about it and take a particular direction. I think that would be helpful, and I'd be willing to kick that off in support of you and model doing that in a constructive way in the team. Would you like to do that? Then you just go quiet and see what they say. So,
Beautiful.
How we do things, behaviors, can make a huge difference, and they're much easier to change than minds.
Beautiful. So intention, observation, request, IOR, and there are a series of ebooks on your website, again, at donmaruska.com. And I'll put the link to those, so where they can get that on your show notes of your page. So if anyone is listening to this on YouTube or podcast, just follow that link, and then you can get straight to Don's page as well. I love it. It makes a lot of sense. And also, having been an executive myself, to have someone, give me a gift of feedback and recommendation in that format, I think I can also just imagine that feels better. So talking about the different brain engagement. So last question for me, and we've gone way over time because I'm just really enjoying this. And as Everyday Entrepreneurs has no real rules, we're just having fun with it and learning and discovering. I want to loop back to Purpose Alliance, and you mentioned the Carbon Watchers, and Purpose Alliance is a global organization where teams of people come together for 3 hours and work to come up with ideas to solve global related problems, future of the planet. And our team came up with Carbon Watchers. These videos are online, so I'll actually post a link to the actual solution we came out, because that's open source, so people can sort of see that, and people can find it at purposealliance.org. But a question for me is what drew you to volunteer your time on a Saturday or Friday? It was an awkward time for you, I think, based on the time zone.
Friday night.
Yeah, you sacrificed to be there, and there was people from Spain, I think Cameroon, and it was a delight having you there. But what I'm curious is, what was your draw, or like what attracted to you, and what did you get from it? Just really fascinated.
Well, what attracted me to it is that there are several key things that are really important to me at this stage in my career. Climate action is one. And so the idea of thinking about what could be done for the planet was really appealing. The other two are how to deal with the needs and how to integrate our unhoused neighbors into our communities, and how to help people that are coming out of prison get integrated back into their communities. So I'm targeting kind of, what are the big, hairy challenges out there, and what can be done about them. So I've been looking around and talking with people and doing things on the climate action arena, and thinking about, what could be done to really kick this up a notch or two. And so my coach, so I suggest everyone have a coach. So I have a coach, said, she's one of the mentors in the program, Meryl Moritz. And she said, hey, this is a group of doers. Don, you're a doer, so get connected with this group, and maybe they'll have some ideas. So that's what really triggered it, and that was the interest. And my feeling is that in order for us to mobilize the planet to deal with climate change and the CO greenhouse gas emissions. We've got to have people have to have some skin in the game. They have to have some reason to care. And so getting people to think about their carbon footprint, how to reduce it, struck me to be a way that would probably have many ripple effects. If they do that, they're probably going to advocate for public policies to, diminish the use of fossil fuels for generating electricity. I mean, they'll do a lot of other things because they've cared enough to change their own behavior and to change their own actions. And they've done it in a sustained enough way that it's now become part of who they are, and they now are championing that. So, and I also felt that, in order for people to advocate for other people to make changes, we have to have the integrity of making change ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so those were the things that drew me to the opportunity. And I was intrigued to see, what could happen in a one-day charrette kind of opportunity on that, and I was very pleased with it. You're a great coach in that context, and a wonderful mentor for that, because you had the sense of how to help people work with the structure of the Purpose Alliance, and yet add their own creativity to it, and with a thoughtful, effective, light touch kind of leadership, which you modeled extraordinarily well. And that's why I'm very excited about what you're doing with Ebullient and, your simplicity scans and other sorts of things, because it strikes me that, that you're coming from that place very authentically and seeking to serve others and help them achieve what they want to achieve. So my hat's off to you.
Thank you for that feedback. It's heartwarming. I really appreciate it. Yeah, Ebullient, it was born during Corona, and in my inspiration to give back. I'm still not sure where it will go, or if it will be monetized, because right now that's not the point. I'm learning, I'm sharing, I'm promoting, I'm celebrating, and that is enriching in itself. And it was delightful to have you on the team. Those things are always so fascinating, with so many different personalities. And about midway, I'm also asking myself, where are we going to get with this? But I know we're going to get somewhere. And so it's with that confidence that, these people coming together, giving their knowledge and their experience, are going to make something, magical happen. And with Carbon Watchers, we certainly did. So thank you so much, so much for joining. Again, I will post the link to donmaruska.com. That's MARUSKA.com. Down there's also the different ebooks to download, and of course, if you are an executive or on an executive team that's struggling, that could use some of this coaching based on the style we've just received today, please reach out to Don. It's been a delight having you on for this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. It's been my pleasure.
Learn more at ebullient.com/podcast.